There exists within the overthinker's mind a construction so elaborate, so intellectually sophisticated, so thoroughly convincing in its complexity that it has deceived even its architect, the fortress of endless analysis. This is not the healthy contemplation of the wise person or the productive reflection of the thoughtful individual. This is something far more insidious and far more tragic. A psychological defense system so brilliant in its design that it masquerades as intelligence while serving the most primitive function of all, the avoidance of life itself. If you are an overthinker, if you pride yourself on your analytical nature, if you believe your constant mental churning is evidence of your intellectual superiority, then prepare yourself for a truth that will shatter your most cherished illusion. You are not thinking your way to enlightenment. You are thinking your way into a prison of your own construction. Jung understood what the overthinker cannot bear to acknowledge, that excessive analysis is not a sign of intelligence, but a symptom of fear, not evidence of depth, but proof of avoidance, not the mark of a sophisticated mind, but the strategy of a terrified psyche that has learned to substitute mental motion for meaningful action. The overthinker has become addicted to the familiar comfort of consideration while remaining chronically allergic to the unfamiliar discomfort of decision. They have built a palace of possibilities in their mind while allowing their actual life to atrophy from neglect. This fortress of analysis serves a specific psychological function. It creates the illusion of progress while ensuring that no real progress occurs. The overthinker can spend hours, days, weeks contemplating a decision, examining it from every conceivable angle, considering every possible outcome, preparing for every potential scenario, all while avoiding the one thing that would actually move their life forward, making a choice and acting upon it. They become what Jung might have called provisional personalities, people who are always preparing to live, but never actually living, always getting ready to begin, but never actually beginning. The fortress is constructed from what I call analysis addiction, the unconscious belief that perfect understanding must precede right action, that all variables must be considered before any choice can be made, that uncertainty is dangerous and must be eliminated through thinking rather than embraced through living. The overthinker becomes convinced that their exhaustive mental processing is productive work, noble effort, evidence of their conscientiousness and intelligence. They mistake mental motion for progress, intellectual activity for growth, complexity of thought for sophistication of being. But beneath this elaborate construction lies a truth the overthinker dare not face. Their endless analysis is not about finding the right answer, but about avoiding any answer at all. It is not about making the perfect choice, but about avoiding the vulnerability of choosing. It is not about understanding life more deeply, but about remaining safely removed from life's messy, unpredictable, uncontrollable reality. The fortress of analysis becomes a refuge where the overthinker can hide from the terrifying demands of authentic existence. The overthinker has learned to confuse information with wisdom, complexity with insight, mental busyness with meaningful engagement. They collect data obsessively, research endlessly, analyze compulsively, believing that if they just think hard enough, long enough, deep enough, they will finally arrive at perfect clarity, absolute certainty, guaranteed success. But this is the very thinking that prevents them from living, the very analysis that keeps them from experiencing, the very intelligence that has become their greatest obstacle to growth. Jung recognized that this pattern often begins in childhood, when the developing person discovers that thinking protects them from feeling, that analysis shields them from vulnerability, that intellectual complexity earns them approval, while emotional authenticity brings rejection or punishment. The child learns that being smart is safer than being real, that having answers is more valuable than asking questions, that appearing to know is more rewarded than admitting ignorance. The fortress of analysis becomes their childhood strategy for survival, carried into adulthood, where it continues to protect them from risks they no longer need protection from. The tragedy of the overthinker is that their greatest strength has become their greatest weakness. Their most developed capacity has become their most limiting pattern. Their intellectual gifts have become the very chains that bind them to a half-lived life. They have become prisoners of their own mental sophistication, trapped by the very faculty they believe sets them free. Beneath the overthinker's endless analysis lurks one of the most sophisticated forms of shadow possession Jung ever identified: intellectual superiority as a defense against the vulnerability of being human. The overthinker has unconsciously organized their entire identity around being the smart one, the thoughtful one, the one who considers all angles while others act impulsively. This intellectual grandiosity serves a crucial psychological function. It protects them from the humiliation of being wrong, the embarrassment of being ordinary, the terror of being seen as just another fallible human being stumbling through life without a master plan. This shadow manifests as what I call analysis narcissism, the unconscious belief that their thinking is superior to others' thinking, that their considerations are more thorough, their insights more profound, their mental processes more sophisticated. The overthinker looks at people who make quick decisions with a mixture of envy and disdain, simultaneously wishing they could act so freely while convincing themselves that such spontaneity is evidence of intellectual inferiority. They have made their overthinking into a virtue, their paralysis into a badge of honor, their inability to act into proof of their superior wisdom. This intellectual inflation creates what Jung called thinking as a superior function, taken to pathological extremes. The overthinker begins to believe that all problems can be solved through analysis, that all situations can be mastered through understanding, that all of life's complexity can be reduced to manageable mental models. They become what I call cognitive omnipotence, people who unconsciously believe their thinking gives them godlike powers to predict, control, and perfect their experience of reality. But this grandiosity masks a profound terror. The overthinker's deepest fear is not of making the wrong choice, but of being exposed as someone who doesn't have all the answers, who cannot think their way out of uncertainty, who is just as confused and vulnerable as everyone else. Their endless analysis is not a search for truth, but a desperate attempt to maintain the illusion of intellectual control in a world that constantly threatens to reveal their fundamental powerlessness. The shadow of intellectual superiority also expresses itself through what I call paralysis as virtue. The overthinker begins to see their inability to make decisions as evidence of their thoroughness, their chronic hesitation as proof of their wisdom, their perpetual delay as demonstration of their conscientiousness. They develop what Jung might have recognized as a complex around indecision, where their failure to act becomes a source of secret pride rather than obvious limitation. This creates a perverse dynamic where the overthinker becomes addicted to the very thing that destroys them. They get a narcissistic high from their mental complexity, a sense of superiority from their analytical depth, a feeling of specialness from their intellectual sophistication. The more they analyze, the smarter they feel. The more they hesitate, the more thoughtful they appear. The more they avoid action, the more evolved they believe themselves to be compared to those impulsive people who actually live their lives. The intellectual superiority shadow also manifests in the overthinker's relationship with others. They become the eternal advisor, the one everyone comes to for analysis and perspective, but never the one who takes their own advice or acts on their own insights. They hide behind their role as the wise counselor, the thoughtful friend, the analytical consultant, using others' willingness to seek their input as proof of their intellectual value, while avoiding the vulnerability of applying their wisdom to their own life. Perhaps most insidiously, this shadow creates what I call wisdom hoarding. The overthinker accumulates insights, understanding and knowledge, like a miser hoards gold, but never spends any of it in the marketplace of actual experience. They become rich in understanding but poor in living, wealthy in analysis but bankrupt in action, sophisticated in thought but primitive in their actual engagement with life. The overthinker's intellectual superiority becomes a prison disguised as a palace, a limitation masquerading as a gift, a wound pretending to be wisdom. They remain trapped in their own mental brilliance, too smart for their own good, too analytical for their own growth, too thoughtful for their own life. At the core of the overthinker's compulsive analysis lies a terror so fundamental, so deeply rooted in their psychological architecture, that it shapes every thought, every consideration, every endless loop of mental churning. The absolute terror of making an imperfect choice. This is not the healthy desire for excellence or the natural preference for good outcomes. This is something far more pathological and far more paralyzing. The unconscious conviction that any choice that is not perfect is not just wrong, but catastrophically dangerous, that any action that does not guarantee success is evidence of personal failure, that any decision that leads to an undesired outcome proves their fundamental inadequacy as a human being. Jung understood that this terror of imperfection often stems from what he called archetypal inflation, the unconscious identification with godlike perfection that makes the ego believe it should be able to predict and control all outcomes, know all variables, anticipate all consequences. The overthinker has unconsciously taken on the burden of omniscience, believing that their thinking should grant them powers that no human being actually possesses. The ability to see the future, to know all variables, to guarantee perfect outcomes through perfect analysis. This creates what I call the perfectionist's paradox. The more the overthinker tries to make perfect choices, the less capable they become of making any choices at all. The pursuit of perfection leads not to perfect action, but to perfect paralysis. The demand for certainty creates not clarity, but confusion. The attempt to eliminate all risk results in the complete avoidance of life itself. The overthinker becomes so afraid of making the wrong choice that they make no choice, so terrified of imperfect action that they take no action, so paralyzed by the possibility of failure that they guarantee failure through inaction. This terror manifests in what I call catastrophic thinking. The overthinker's mind automatically jumps to worst-case scenarios, imagining devastating consequences for any potential choice. They cannot consider taking a new job without imagining complete career destruction. They cannot contemplate ending a relationship without envisioning lifelong loneliness. They cannot think about making any significant change without seeing it leading to total disaster. Their minds become horror movie theaters, where every possible future plays out as a tragedy. The terror of imperfection also creates what Jung might have recognized as decision phobia, a genuine psychological aversion to the act of choosing itself. The overthinker begins to experience physical anxiety symptoms when faced with decisions: racing heart, sweaty palms, racing thoughts, insomnia. Their nervous system treats the act of choosing as it would treat a life-threatening situation, because in their unconscious psychology, making an imperfect choice feels equivalent to psychological death. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of this terror is how it prevents the overthinker from learning the very lessons that could free them from their prison. Growth requires making imperfect choices and learning from the consequences. Wisdom comes from acting without complete information and adapting to unexpected outcomes. Maturity develops through making mistakes and discovering that most mistakes are survivable, correctable, even valuable as learning experiences. The overthinker, in their desperate attempt to avoid all mistakes, deprives themselves of the very experiences that would teach them that mistakes are not catastrophic but educational, that imperfect choices are not evidence of inadequacy but proof of courage, that uncertainty is not dangerous but the natural condition of human existence. They remain forever children in their relationship to choice, never developing the adult capacity to act in the face of uncertainty, to choose without guarantees, to live without perfect knowledge. This terror also creates what I call vicarious living. The overthinker becomes fascinated by people who make bold choices, take risks, act decisively, but they experience these qualities only through observation, never through their own action. They become connoisseurs of courage without ever being courageous, experts on decision-making without ever deciding, philosophers of action without ever acting. They live their unlived life through others while remaining safely trapped in their own mental prison. The perfectionist's paradox reveals itself most clearly in the overthinker's relationship with time. They spend so much time trying to make perfect choices that they run out of time to make any choices at all. Opportunities pass while they analyze. Doors close while they deliberate. Life moves forward while they remain frozen in place, thinking about what they should do. Within the overthinker's psyche operates what Jung might have recognized as a psychological machine of extraordinary sophistication and devastating efficiency. The anxiety engine, a self-perpetuating system that converts uncertainty into mental drama, transforms simple decisions into epic internal struggles, and produces a constant stream of worry that feels productive but serves only to keep the overthinker trapped in a cycle of perpetual mental motion that goes nowhere. This engine does not run on logic or reason, but on a primitive addiction to the familiar intensity of anxiety, the known discomfort of mental chaos, the strange comfort found in psychological turbulence. The anxiety engine operates through what I call problem multiplication, the overthinker's unconscious tendency to take any simple situation and generate an infinite number of complications, variables, and potential disasters. A basic decision about where to eat dinner becomes a philosophical examination of nutrition, budget, social dynamics, future regret, and existential meaning. A simple conversation becomes a forensic analysis of every word spoken, every facial expression noticed, every possible interpretation of every gesture. The overthinker has learned to find problems where none exist, to create complexity where simplicity would suffice, to manufacture crisis where peace is possible. This multiplication serves a specific psychological function. It keeps the overthinker's mind so busy with manufactured emergencies that they never have to face the real issues lying beneath their compulsive analysis. The anxiety engine becomes a sophisticated avoidance mechanism, generating enough mental noise to drown out the quiet voice of authentic intuition, creating enough internal drama to distract from the emptiness of a life unlived, producing enough worry to justify the lack of action that worry itself creates. Jung understood that this pattern often becomes addictive because anxiety, despite its discomfort, provides something the overthinker unconsciously craves: the feeling of importance, intensity, and engagement without any of the risks that real engagement would require. The overthinker becomes addicted to their own mental drama because it makes them feel alive, significant, engaged with life's complexity, even though it actually keeps them completely removed from life's reality. The addiction manifests as what I call worry as identity. The overthinker begins to equate their anxiety with their intelligence, their mental churning with their depth, their inability to rest with their sophistication. They develop what Jung might have called a complex around complexity, where their psychological turbulence becomes a source of secret pride rather than obvious suffering. They begin to see people who don't worry as much as shallow, those who make quick decisions as superficial, those who live with peace as somehow less evolved than those who live in constant mental motion. This creates a perverse relationship with solutions. The overthinker unconsciously resists answers because answers would end the drama, clarity would eliminate the complexity, resolution would remove the intensity that has become their psychological drug of choice. They become solution-averse, preferring the familiar chaos of perpetual analysis to the unfamiliar peace of decision and action. They ask for advice, but don't take it. Seek clarity, but don't accept it. Request help, but don't use it. The anxiety engine also feeds on what I call temporal displacement. The overthinker learns to live everywhere except the present moment. They either ruminate about past decisions, analyzing what went wrong and how they could have chosen differently, or they catastrophize about future possibilities, imagining every way things could go wrong and how they should prepare for disaster. The present moment, where actual life occurs and real choices can be made, becomes a place they visit only accidentally and flee from as quickly as possible. Perhaps most tragically, the anxiety engine prevents the overthinker from developing the very capacity that could free them. The ability to tolerate uncertainty, to act without complete information, to live with the natural ambiguity that characterizes human existence. Instead of learning to dance with uncertainty, they declare war on it. Instead of making friends with the unknown, they treat it as an enemy to be defeated through analysis. Instead of accepting that life is inherently unpredictable, they exhaust themselves trying to predict the unpredictable. The overthinker becomes what Jung might have called a psychological hamster, running frantically on the wheel of their own thoughts, generating enormous amounts of mental energy while making no actual progress, creating the illusion of movement while remaining perfectly still. We arrive now at the threshold of transformation, where the overthinker who has been trapped in the prison of their own analysis finally discovers that freedom comes not through more thinking, but through less thinking, not through perfect understanding, but through imperfect action, not through eliminating uncertainty, but through embracing it as the natural condition of human existence. The path to liberation requires what Jung called a sacrifice of the intellect, not the abandonment of thinking, but the willingness to subordinate analysis to action, to value experience over theory, to choose living over understanding. This transformation begins with what I call conscious rebellion against the mind's tyranny. The overthinker must recognize that their thinking has become not their servant, but their master, not their tool, but their prison warden, not their ally, but their saboteur. They must be willing to commit what feels like intellectual suicide, making decisions without complete information, acting without guarantee of success, choosing without certainty of outcome. This requires a profound shift from being someone who thinks about life to being someone who lives life, from being an analyst of experience to being an experiencer of reality. The liberation process requires what Jung called holding the tension of opposites, learning to be both intelligent and spontaneous, both thoughtful and decisive, both analytical and intuitive. The liberated overthinker does not abandon their capacity for deep thought, but learns to use it as one tool among many rather than as the only tool for everything. They develop what I call strategic thinking, the ability to analyze when analysis serves them and to act when action serves them, knowing the difference between productive contemplation and destructive rumination. This transformation often begins with what seems like the smallest possible step, making one imperfect decision quickly and discovering that the world does not end. The overthinker must risk the very failure they have spent their lives trying to avoid and learn through direct experience. That most failures are survivable, most mistakes are correctable, most imperfect choices lead to perfectly acceptable outcomes. They must discover that the catastrophic consequences they imagine rarely materialize, that their worst-case scenarios are usually products of anxiety rather than prophecy. The liberated overthinker learns to distinguish between problems that deserve analysis and problems that require action, between situations that benefit from contemplation and situations that demand immediate response. They develop what I call decision fitness, The capacity to make choices quickly when speed matters and slowly when deliberation serves, knowing which is which without having to analyze the analysis itself. Perhaps most importantly, the transformed overthinker discovers that their greatest insights come not from thinking but from acting, not from analysis but from experience, not from understanding but from engagement. They learn that wisdom is not something you think your way into, but something you live your way into, that clarity comes not from perfect analysis, but from imperfect action, followed by honest reflection. The liberation also requires embracing what Jung called creative indifference to outcomes, the ability to choose and act without being attached to specific results, to engage fully while holding lightly to expectations. The freed overthinker learns to plant seeds without obsessing over the harvest, to make choices without guaranteeing consequences, to live with the natural uncertainty that makes life an adventure rather than an anxiety. This transformation reveals the overthinker's greatest secret. Beneath all their analysis lay profound wisdom, intuition, and intelligence that could never be accessed through thinking alone. When they finally stop thinking their way through life and start living their way through life, they discover capacities they never knew they had, insights that no amount of analysis could provide, a form of intelligence that emerges only through engagement with reality rather than retreat from it. The liberated overthinker becomes someone who thinks when thinking serves, acts when acting serves, and lives when living calls. They transform from prisoners of their own intelligence into masters of their own experience, from analysts of life into artists of living, from people who think about thinking into people who think, choose, act, and live with the full recognition that perfection was never the goal. Engagement was. Your overthinking was never intelligence, it was fear wearing a clever disguise. Your analysis was never wisdom, it was avoidance pretending to be preparation. Your mental complexity was never sophistication, it was simplicity's shadow, afraid to show its face. The moment you choose imperfect action over perfect analysis, everything changes. The moment you risk being wrong rather than remaining safe, life begins. The moment you stop hiding behind your thoughts and start living through your choices, you discover who you really are beneath all that thinking, someone capable of so much more than they ever imagined possible. If you recognize yourself in this mirror, if you see your own mental prison reflected in these words, then your liberation begins with the most terrifying and necessary act an overthinker can commit. Make one imperfect decision today. Not because you've analyzed it to death, but because you're ready to start living instead of just thinking about living. Subscribe to this channel if you're ready to stop hiding behind your analysis and start engaging with reality. Share this video with another overthinker who needs to understand that their mental complexity isn't wisdom, it's fear dressed up as intelligence. And most importantly, practice this today. Find one decision you've been overthinking. Something you've been analyzing, researching, contemplating for weeks or months. Give yourself exactly 5 minutes to decide, then act on that decision immediately. Feel the terror of imperfection and do it anyway. Discover that you can survive making choices without guarantees. Your overthinking isn't making you smarter, it's making you smaller. Your analysis isn't protecting you, it's imprisoning you. Your mental complexity isn't evidence of sophistication. It's proof that you're hiding from the magnificent simplicity of actually living your life. Stop thinking your way into the perfect life and start living your way into the real one. Stop being a professional analyst of experience and start being an amateur practitioner of reality. Stop hiding behind your intelligence and start revealing your courage. The world doesn't need another person who can think about everything. It needs you to stop thinking and start being. Your life is waiting on the other side of your next imperfect decision. Make it now.